Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for being here. I hope everyone is well. I hope you've had some water and ate something. Thank you. And taken your meds. I know, I know. After this, I'll hop into the. We finished off part one of chapter 2 last week. And we finished off with the creation of the language of Orientalism and how post World War One, Europe had colonized 85% of the earth, and how Orientalism became a key aspect of colonialism. And he says here, it is not enough to say that imperialism and colonialism are interlinked. And it needs to be worked through analytically and historically. So when we look at this of whole, we see this picture being built of how domination was possible from what they called the Near East to the Far East. So here in part 2, he's looking at De Sacy and Ernst Renan, the Rational Anthropology and Philological Laboratory. The two great themes of Sylvestre de Sacy's life are heroic effort and a dedicated sense of pedagogic and rational utility. Born in 1757 to a how do you pronounce this word? A Jansenist family, whose occupation was traditionally that of notaire. Antoine Isaac Sylvestre was privately tutored at a Benedictine abbey, first in Arabic, Syriac, and Chaldean, then Hebrew. Arabic in particular was the language that opened the Orient to him, since it was in Arabic, according to Joseph Renaud, that Oriental material, both sacred and profane, was then to be found in its oldest and most instructive form. And when we say that he was taught in Hebrew, I'm talking about ancient Hebrew, not the Hebrew that we know today. Although a legitimist, in 1769 he was appointed the first teacher of Arabic at the newly created School of the Living Oriental Languages. And yes, there are many dead languages all over the world, not just ones that have been killed by imperialism and colonialism. A lot of languages died before colonialism and imperialism. So we have to understand how the context that De Sacy was coming from. This is a Frenchman who was educated in Arabic and then created the school for the living Oriental languages, of which he became director in 1824. In 1806, he was on the resident Orientalist. We have representatives from each country to those countries. Back then, during the height of imperialism, we see that ambassadors not only were from the countries that they were ambassadors to, it was all through their own lens. Because apparently they couldn't trust the people from those lands, so they had to send somebody to those lands to learn about it or to study about it at various universities. And then they came back and said, okay, I'm good enough. From America to Syria. They experience Syria for a couple of years and they come back and say, I'm good enough to be the ambassador for this country, to do all of these diplomatic missions and whatnot. And that's essentially what's happening with Israel right now. People not from Palestine are speaking for Palestine. People from the West are speaking for the Jewish people in the region. It's all one big merry mess. There, his work, unpaid until 1811, at first was to translate the bulletins of the army at Napoleon's manifesto of 1806, in which it was hoped that quote-unquote Muslim fanaticism could be excited against Russian orthodoxy. But for many years thereafter, Saïd created interpreters for the French Oriental I don't know what this word is. Dragominate. Dragominate? I'm going to look it up. The office roller body of interpreters, translators, and guides, especially those working for European embassies and consulates in the Middle East and the Ottoman Empire. Okay, it's quite a specific term. The dragominate. As well as future scholars. When the French occupied Algiers in 1830, it was Saïd who translated the proclamation to the Algerians. He was regularly consulted on all diplomatic matters relating to the Orient by the foreign minister and, on occasion, by the Minister of War. At the age of 75, he replaced Dessières as secretary of the Académie des Inscriptions and became curator of the Oriental manuscripts at the Bibliothèque Royale. Throughout his long and distinguished career, his name was rightly associated with the restructuring and reforming of education, particularly in Oriental studies. In post-revolutionary France, with Cuvier, Saïd in 1832 was made an entire systematic body of texts, a pedagogic practice, a scholarly tradition, and an important link between Oriental scholarship and a land from outside go in and say, we are going to write policy based on our... In Saïd's work, for the first time in Europe since the Council of Vienne, there was a self-conscious methodological principle at work as coeval with scholarly discipline. No less important, Saïd always felt himself to be a man standing at the beginning of an important revisionist project. Key word here, revisionist. He secularized ecclesiastic me and my pronunciations. Also, hello B, welcome. For whom his Orient and his students were doctrine and parishioners respectively. So it became a kind of a dogma that this is what we are saying about the Orient and this is what the Orient is and nothing can be deviated from. The Duc de Broglie, an admiring contemporary, said of Saïd's work that it reconciled the manner of a scientist with that of a biblical teacher, and that Saïd was one man able to reconcile the goals of Leibniz with the efforts of Bossuet. Consequently, everything he wrote was addressed specifically to students, especially in the case of his first work, the Principles of Grammar, of general grammar in 1799, the student was his own son, and presented not as a novelty but as a revised extract of the best that had already been done, said, or written. They had already, they had already gone into the idea of postmodernism, even in the 1700s. These two characteristics, the didactic presentation to students and the avowed intention of repeating by revision and extract, are crucial. Sacy's writing always conveys the tone of a voice speaking, his prose dotted with first-person pronouns, with personal qualifications, rhetorical presence. Even at his most recondite, as a scholarly note in 3rd century numismatics, one sense not so much a pen writing as a voice pronouncing. And this is a lot of what a lot of people enjoy about reading audiobooks these days. They listen to audiobooks and like this actually gives the author a literal voice. Especially when it comes to, look at me, I'm an absolute klutz. Especially when it comes to academic texts, because academic texts seem to be so far removed from what they're actually discussing because of the language used. Having a narrative voice is quite important in many senses. And that's why we kind of cling to the works of people like Bell Hooks and Angela Davis, because they put themselves into their work so beautifully. The principles of grammar, which is to say, I am writing or speaking to you. Oh, right, it's in French. I am writing or speaking to you because you need to know these things, and since they don't exist in any serviceable form, I have done the work myself for you. The direct address, utility, effort, immediate and beneficent rationality. For Sacy believed that everything could be made clear and reasonable, no matter how difficult the task and how obscure the subject. Now, contrast this to what we read in Renée Edo-Lodge's book yesterday, when she was talking about white privilege. The approaches here are of two. Everything could be rationalized, and Renée Edo-Lodge, on the other hand, says no. It's really hard to explain certain concepts because that would be kind of like quite pointless, because you have to have the lived experience to understand it fully. Just by hearing somebody's story, you cannot understand their story, you cannot understand their lived experience. So completely different approaches here. As well as the tone of Rousseau, altogether the same style. The effect of Sacy's tone is to form a circle sealing off him and his audience from the world at large, the way a teacher and his pupils together in a closed classroom form a sealed space. And I think this is really the beginnings of the idea of the untouchable ivory tower. Oh yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. That is really a good way of... There's a really good way of looking at it, yeah. Absolutely. Please remember to tap the screen and share the live out. If you are on Twitch and YouTube, please share it out to your family and friends. And yeah, I don't think anybody is coming into the Discord today. Yeah, it's quite an empty Discord space right now. Unlike the matter of physics, philosophy, or classical literature, the matter of Oriental studies is arcane. It is important to people who have already had an interest in the Orient but want to know the Orient better, in a more orderly way, and here the pedagogical discipline is more effective than it is attractive. Of course. The didactic speaker therefore changed topics. What it must be like to be able to put things into a box. And I was telling one of my besties, Sumaya, I was telling her a while ago, like, I keep on arranging my house because my brain is so disordered. And I don't really want to order things in my brain because that'll ruin the creative flow of things and the people magic that I quite like making. And so I don't want to order my brain. I ordered the space around me and put things into boxes in the spaces around me so that something is in order and not everything is chaos. So because the house is no longer chaos, the brain can do its thing. I've been doing some of my best writing of late over the past 2 days. I wonder why. Since the Orient is old and distant, forever old, forever distant, forever in this space of yeah, it's fixed in our minds in that way. The whole hazy thing that that happens with the camera whenever they're looming over the dunes. And you can read my piece, I think either on Substack or on Patreon, on how Frank Herbert's Dune is an example of Orientalism, but let's not go there right now. And I know the nerds who have either read or watched Dune, y'all will have something to say. Y'all will definitely have something to say. Anyway, I digress. Since the Orient is old and distant, the teacher's display is a restoration, a revision of what has happened from the wider ken. And since also the vastly rich space, time, and culture's Orient cannot be totally exposed, only its most representative parts need to be. Thus, Saïd's focus on the anthology, the chrestomathy, the tableau, the survey of general principles, in which a relatively small set of powerful examples delivers the Orient to the student. Such examples are powerful for two reasons. One, because they reflect Saïd's power as a Western authority deliberately taking from the Orient what its distant and eccentricity have hitherto been kept hidden. And two, because these examples, and I quite agree, because Saïd's power as a Western authority deliberately takes from what he perceives as the Orient to communicate what is the Orient is important here. And semiotical power, there's Albert Althusser's theory of semiotics, or is it Saussure's theory of semiotics? I cannot remember. My media and my media lecturers are going to have my head if they ever see this video. Is it... Who wrote the theory of semiotics? Is it Saussure? Albert Saussure? I can't remember. It's all dead white men. Somebody wrote a theory of semiotics that that there is no correlation between the signified and the signifier, only the meaning that we create or that we give to it. So there is no inherent thing about this receptacle that makes it a mug. What makes it a mug is that we call it a mug. The owl doesn't have a name yet, though. A little bit of a story about an owl. 2 stories about an owl, actually. When I was little, I thought it was a nowl, N-O-W-L, instead of an owl, A-N-O-W-L. I thought it was A-N-O-W-L. So I thought it was a nowl, not an owl. So I used to call them nowls. Look, there's a nowl in the tree. Or I want a, and then my parents only realized that I was saying nowl when I asked for a pet nowl. And then they corrected me. The other one is that I didn't really have American friends until recently, until like the past 5 years. So it's only in the past 5 years that I realized that it was the Super Bowl and not the superb owl. majority of my life, I thought it was the superb owl. Semiotics was written by Pierce. Thank you. Thank you so much. They're all dead white men, but thank you. I will keep that in mind. So the semiotics of Orientalism means the thing that decides what the... Because we all agree that this is a mug, not a cup. And everything exists in relation to each other. Really pulling from my first year media theory. All of Saïd's work is essentially compilatory, and thus ceremoniously didactic and painstakingly revisionist. And when we look at revisionist history in the sense now, like how we're revising history and unwhitewashing it, or should I say, we're colorizing history. What we're doing is we're reclaiming the narrative. Revisionist in this sense was revising the truth to create a narrative. And now what we're doing now, revising history, is revising the narrative to reveal the truth. So, thank you. Aside from the principles of grammar, he produced the Chrestomathie Arab in 3 volumes in 1806 and 1827, an anthology of Arab grammatical writing, and in 1825, an Arabic grammar of 1810 for usage in special education schools. And in French, by special education, we mean specific topics, so specialized education. Treatise on Arabic prosody and the Druze religion, and numerous short works on Oriental numismatics, onomastics, epigraphy, geography, history, and weights and measures. He did a fair number of translations and 2 extended commentaries on Halela and Duma and the Maqamat of Al-Hariri. As editor, memorialist, and historian of modern learning, Saïd was similarly energetic. There's very little note in other related disciplines with which he was not a courant, although his own writing was single-minded and it's of the imperial regimes. Yet, when in 1802 the Institute of France was commissioned by Napoleon to form the 1939, Saïd was chosen to be one of the team of writers. He was the most rigorous of specialists and the most historically minded of the generalists. Dessier's report, as it was known informally, embodied many of Saïd's predilections as well as containing his contributions to the state of Oriental learning. In its title, Tableau historique, l'érudition française, announces the new historical as opposed to sacred consciousness of the Orient. So before they went into the academics of it, they would look at the religion first. So Saïd was secularist, but also we know from throughout history that even secularists did use the ideology and the mechanisms of religion to dominate other peoples. Of course, it was anti-Islamic all the way. Such consciousness preface stated the theme perfectly. Such a survey as this made it possible to do something no other sovereign had attempted, namely to take in, with one coup d'œil, the whole of human knowledge. Thank you. Had such a tableau had been undertaken in former times, Dacier continues, we might today have possessed many masterpieces, now either lost about the loss or destruction of texts from colonized lands. They never say they destroyed them. The interest and utility of the tableau were that it preserved knowledge and made it immediately accessible. See, and there's the thing, they destroyed all local knowledge, they destroyed all local texts, they destroyed everything that would have gone against their narrative, and in its place put in this Orientalist version of what the East is. What is the Orient in relation to the Occident? And therefore we go back to Fanon's question, how do we extricate ourselves? We cannot. Because all of our knowledge that was born out of our own people and our own cultures that were never done with the white man in mind were destroyed, and we can only really define ourselves as people of the global majority in relation to the people of the global minority, which is white people. Dacier imitated that such a task was simplified by Napoleon's Oriental expedition, one of whose results was to heighten the degree of modern geographical knowledge. At no point, more than Dacier's entire discourse, do we see how the dramatic form of the tableau has use equivalent the arcades and counters of a modern department store. I love that. I fucking love that. Because, you know, you look into a department store and you see like everything you need. But it's also meh. To be honest, Macy's is a department store. Everybody, when I went to New York, everybody's like, oh, you have to go to Macy's, you have to go to Macy's. The most amazing thing I saw in Macy's was a kid trip up the stairs. And that is Orientalist writing to me. A department store that has nothing extraordinary about it is a cheap imitation of everything it tries to instill in people. They organize controlling our minds and generations and wealth since the 1400s and earlier. Absolutely. The importance of the tableau for an understanding of Orientalism inaugural phase is that it exteriorizes the form of Orientalist knowledge and features, as it also describes the relationship to his subject matter, the Orientalist's relationship to his subject matter. This is a person who is going in and saying, I have authority over you, because Orientalism, as elsewhere in his writing, he speaks of his own work as having uncovered, brought to light, rescued, all of those kinds of verbiage, a vast amount of obscure matter. Why didn't you fucking ask the people? Okay, let me tell you a little bit of story. As soon as, we've reached the end of that paragraph. The platypus. Animal. The platypus is one of the cutest little deadly things in this world. The males have barbs or spurs on their back legs, and if it pierces you, you can die. I like sloths and koalas and cats. I also like sloths and koalas and cats. I want to see a sloth fall off his tree. But the platypus is a fascinating animal. Bill like a duck, webbed feet like a duck. So it's a little bit of bird. It is a mammal, fully warm-blooded, suckling its young mammal with all of the bodily traits of a mammal, the internal bodily functions of a mammal, and it lays eggs. But it's also amphibious in terms of how much time it spends underwater and what it can actually do underwater. It can't breathe underwater, that's one thing, but everything else, it's like a frog. So it is this weird ass bird otter frog hybrid. Locals, the platypus, and could have taught the colonizer everything. The colonizers killed hundreds, if not thousands, of platypodes. Yes, the plural of platypus is platypodes. And I'm just waiting for somebody in the chat to say Platopodes nuts. I'm going to say it first. They killed hundreds, if not thousands, of Platopodes and sent samples back to Europe to be studied. I love etymology. To be studied, when all they could have done was communicate with the local people to understand the platypus. They almost drove it to extinction in trying to study it because they did not trust somebody with brown skin. They had to do their own studying on it instead of trusting the fucking locals. Why does he use the words uncovered, brought to light, rescued, all of these things? In order to place it before the student. For like all his learned contemporaries, Sayce considered a learned work a positive addition to an edifice that all scholars erected together, which is quite fair. Because, hi Melon, because you put together a lot of knowledge. You put together like a series of essays and you put it to get this broader picture of what something is. Collaborative knowledge is better knowledge. But what happens when that collaborative knowledge does not include the people whose voices need to be heard the most? Knowledge was essentially making visible of material, and the aim of a tableau, in the Western sense, was the construction of a sort of benathemite panopticon. Scholarly discipline was therefore is power. And gatekeeping knowledge is holding on to power. Gained for its user and students tools and knowledge which, if he was a historian, had hitherto been lost. And indeed the vocabulary of specialized power and acquisition is particularly associated with Sayce's reputation as a pioneer in Orientalism. His heroism as a scholar was to have dealt successfully with insurmountable difficulties, acquiring the means to present a field to his students where there was supposedly none. He made the books, the presets, the examples, said the Duc de Broglie of Sayce. The result was the production of material about the Orient, methods for studying it, and exemplar that even Orientals did not have. And here I think he's saying it rather tongue-in-cheek. Compared with the labours of Hellenists or Latinists working in the Institute team, Sayce's labourers were awesome. They had the texts, the conventions, schools. He did not, and consequently had to go about making them. The dynamic of the primary loss and subsequent gain in Sayce's writing is obsessional. His investment in it was heavy. Like his colleagues in other fields, he believed that knowledge is seeing, panoptically so to speak, but unlike them, he not only had to identify the knowledge, he had to decipher it, interpret it, and, most difficultly, make it available. Sayce's achievement was to have produced a whole field of knowledge. Rebuild investments, God, I hate those words. Like rebuild investments to whose I fucking hate it. As a European, he ransacked the Oriental archives. Emphasis on ransacked. And he could do so without leaving France. What texts he isolated, he then brought back, doctored, annotated, codified, arranged, and commented on them. In time, the Orient as such became less important than what the Orientalist made of it. Thus drawn by Sayce into the sealed discursive palace of pedagogical tableau, the Orientalist Orient was therefore because it absolutely was not real. Saïd was much too intelligent to let his views and practice stand without supporting arguments, of course. First of all, he always made it plain why the Orient on its own could not survive a European's taste, intelligence, or patience. Racist. Saïd defended the utility and interests of such things as Arabic poetry, but what he was really saying was that Arabic poetry had to be properly transformed by the translator before it could begin to be appreciated. So the meaning changed as to what the European wanted. The reasons were broadly epistemological, but they also contained an Orientalist self-justification. Arabic poetry was produced by... In addition, such poetry as this was nourished by opinions, prejudices, beliefs, superstitions, which we can acquire only after a long and painful study. This is quote unquote. Even if one does not go through the rigors of specialized training, much of the description in the poetry will not be accessible to Europeans who have, quote, attained to a higher degree of civilization, unquote. I need a punching bag. Every time I want to punch an Orientalist, every time I want to punch a racist, every time I want to punch I need to punch a punching bag. B, you are thousands of kilometers away and I will not punch you. Yet, what we can master is of great value to us as Europeans, accustomed to disguise our exterior attributes, bodily activity, and our relationship to nature. Therefore, the Orientalist use is to make available to his compatriots a considerable range of unusual experiences, and still more valuable, the kind of literature capable of helping us understand the truly divine poetry of... Because they whitened Christ. Well, actually, thank you for the follow, Moon. It's 12,255 kilometers. My apologies. So if the Orientalist is necessary because he fishes some useful gems out of the distant Oriental deep, and since the Orient cannot be known without his mediation, it is his introduction to his theory of fragments, a common romantic era concern. Not only are Oriental literary productions essentially alien to Europe, they also do not contain a sustained enough interest, nor are they written well enough or with enough taste and critical spirit to merit publication, except as pure extracts. Therefore, the Orientalist is required to present the Orient by a series of representative fragments republished, explicated, annotated, and surrounded with still more fragments. For such a presentation was a special genre, and was required, the Chrestomathy, which is where Saïd's case and the usefulness of interest of Orientalism are most directly and profitably displayed. Saïd's most famous production was the 3-volume Chrestomathie Arabe, which was sealed at the outset, so to speak, with an internal rhyming Arabic couplet. A book pleasant and profitable for the studious pupil, it collects fragments of both poetry and prose. Although what they contained was claimed as typical, they submerge and cover the censorship of the Orient exercised by the Orientalist. Tunisia is around 10,000 kilometers away from South Africa. This is true. I can't copy-paste. Kitab, I know the word kitab means book. Al-something, al-mufid, للطالب المستفيد وشطور من matum. I cannot read that. Important to know that Edward Said, his first language was Arabic. So, what do we get here from Saysi's writing? The Saysi's writing was always presented as Ohio doesn't exist, ancestral. What we get here is that he didn't have to leave France to understand the Orient. He could study it from his couch. Because all that needed to be known about the Orient to the West. Yeah, Ohio's not real. The Book of the Mufti. Okay. Kitab al-Mufti al-Talib. Yeah. It is the Book of the Mufti. So he kind of crowns himself as the Mufti of okay. No, I'm joking. It's just a long-standing joke with the communist community on TikTok that Ohio isn't real. I don't know if it started with the Book of the Beneficial Student. Okay. Yeah, I'm trying my best with the Arabic. Ohio's not real. So he is crowning himself as the arbiter of all Oriental knowledge. I feel like I met someone, an American person who lived in the UK, who was doing her PhD in, well, they still called it at Oxford, the Oriental languages. And she was doing her PhD in the languages of the South Asian persuasion. She was fluent in Hindi, or so she said. American accent, it was painful to listen to. She did have a better vocabulary in Hindi than I do. And that in itself was telling. That my ancestors were beaten up in the field whenever they spoke Hindi. Beaten almost to death. So much so that generation after generation we lost our languages. I speak very little Hindi. मैं थोड़ा सी Hindi बोल. But whenever I do speak the Hindi, I speak it properly. And she had a full scholarship to the University of Oxford to study my language as a white American. When it was violently telling, no? And the puzzle. Unable to verify. So I dropped my phone at Comic-Con earlier this year. And now my screen doesn't do things. I mean, like, just doesn't do things properly. It's that same vibe of I know your culture better than you because you were never allowed to know yours. I know your language better than you because you were violently abused for it. fragments of Oriental knowledge were given to the West, and they would say, "We understand you because we know all there is we need to know, because everything else is irrelevant, because you're not civilized." And it always comes back to, even as an academic discipline, it always comes back to white supremacy. Thank you. They erase indigenous cultures and beliefs and then use them constantly. Yes, profiting off of them. Oh, I want to buy your sari because I want to make cushion covers out of it and sell them. Like, what? What? Although what they contain was claimed as typical, they submerge and covered the censorship of the Orient exercised by the Orientalist. Censorship. He uses the word deliberately. Censorship. The internal order of their contents, the arrangement of their parts, the choices of fragments never reveal their secret. One has the impression that if fragments were not chosen for their importance or for chronological and Oriental naturalness or inevitability. But that too is never said. Saïd claims simply to have exerted himself on behalf of his students to make it unnecessary for them, to purchase or read a grotesquely large library of Oriental stuff. In time, the reader forgets the Orientalist efforts and takes the restructuring of the Orient, signified by this chrestomathy, as the Orient completely, or tout corps. Objective structure, designation of the Orient, and subjective structure, representation by the Orientalist, became interchangeable. The Orient is overlaid with the Orientalist rationality. Its principles become his principle becomes that of the Orient. From being Saïd's anthology is not only supplement to the Orient, they supply it as Oriental presence to the West. So Saïd's work canonized the whole process of knowledge from generation to generation in the actual place itself. The living legacy of Saïd's disciples was astounding. Every major Arabist in Europe during the 19th century traced his intellectual authority back to him. Universities and academics in France, Spain, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and especially Germany were dotted with students who formed themselves at his feet through the anthological tableau provided by his work. As with all intellectual patrimonies, however, enrichments and restrictions were passed on simultaneously. Saïd's genealogical originality was to have treated the Orient as something to be restored, not only because of, but also despite, the modern Orient's disorderly and elusive presence. Saïd placed Arabs in the Orient. It's like they weren't always there, which was itself placed in the tableau of modern learning, as though the Orient didn't exist before the white man wrote about it. Orientalism belonged, therefore, to European scholarship. Its material had been recreated by the Orientalist before it could enter the arcades along Latinism and Hellenism. Each Orientalist recreated his own Orient, or depiction. Just as he was the father of Orientalism, he was also the discipline's first sacrifice. For in translating new texts, fragments, and extracts, subsequent Orients entirely displaced Saïd's work by supplying their own restored Orient. So it was one big game of broken telephone, where the originator wasn't even originally from the place itself. Nevertheless, the process he started would continue, as philology in particular developed systematic and institutional powers Saïd had never exploited. This was Renan's accomplishment, to have associated the Orient with the most recent comparative disciplines, of which philology was one of the most eminent. The difference between Saïd and Renan is the difference between inauguration and continuity. Saïd, the originator, whose work represents the field's emergence and status as a 19th century discipline with roots in the rom- in the revolutionary romanticism. Renan derives from Orientalism's second generation. It was his task to solidify the official discourse of Orientalism, to systematize its insights, and to establish an intellectual and worldly institution of it. Thank you for being here, Ancestral. For Saïd, it was his personal efforts that launched and vitalized the field and structures. For Renan, it was his adaptation of Orientalism to philology, and both of them to the intellectual culture of his time that perpetuate Orientalist structures intellectually and gave them greater visibility. And there I will stop for today because I do not want to get into Renan until next week. Or until tomorrow, depending on whether I decide to read further, because we are only on chapter 2. If I go week by week, this will be here forever. Okay, so I'm going to say goodbye to Twitch and YouTube and to Discord. I shall see y'all tomorrow to read Comrade Gola's book. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Yeah. I look forward to seeing y'all soon.